Well, inflation remains very low in Switzerland. So if you look at our inflation outlook, our inflation forecast, if you go out to a horizon of 2 to 3 years, inflation will be at 0.6%. So this is very, very low, especially on an international comparison. We are very happy that we are back in positive territory, but inflation remains very low.
Now, I noticed in your statement today, you dropped a reference to continuing to provide the banking system with liquidity on generous terms. Does this point to a phasing out of the SNB's COVID-19 refinancing facility?
No, the facility is still in place, but the government stopped the program, so there are no new loans. So the old loans remains in the program, refinanced by the Swiss National Bank, but there is no necessity at the moment to have a new program. So the existing program will go for a couple of years, all the time refinanced by the Swiss National Bank, but there are no new loans at this moment.
Let's talk about the Swiss National Bank relative to other central banks around the world. The Federal Reserve yesterday came through with a more hawkish twist than they had offered previously. Is it fair to assume that the SNB is going to be much, much slower on moving on monetary policy than the Fed?
Well, I cannot comment on the decisions by our colleagues in the United States, but for us it's clear. We still need an expansionary monetary policy, so the Swiss franc is highly valued. Inflation is very low. The output gap is still negative. So all in all, I think it's necessary to maintain the monetary policy unchanged, negative interest rates, but also the willingness to intervene if necessary in the foreign exchange markets are very important at this moment. And that is true probably for some time to come.
What does rising inflation abroad likely mean for demand for the Swiss franc?
Well, Swiss franc is a safe haven. So all the time when we have kind of a crisis, there is an increased demand for the Swiss francs. We saw that especially now also during the COVID crisis, especially in the first part of 2020. So then we had huge inflows and, of course, also a pressure. And the necessity then to intervene was especially high. So the Swiss franc is still highly valued. And this is one of the reasons that we have low inflation, probably lower inflation than elsewhere. And it's also one of the key reasons that we have to maintain our expansionary monetary policy for some time.
Mr. Jordan, this is the first time that we are speaking since the collapse of Archegos Capital. Both globally active Swiss banks were affected by the collapse of this hedge fund. Should it have been possible for a single counterparty to have had this much damage?
Well, I cannot really comment on that. We are not the regulator and supervisor of these two big banks. But of course, what is extremely important is that we have well-capitalized banks. We have a too big to fail regulation in Switzerland that ensures that the banks are sufficiently capitalized. Both banks are sufficiently capitalized. They could absorb those losses. But this event clearly demonstrates that not only macroeconomic events, but also single events can lead to big damages. And this is another reason why we pushed for this too big to fail regulation, that banks have sufficiently capital and, of course, also a very good risk management.